Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my next video. Today I'm going to be revealing my updated 2024 Senate prediction for the month of August. I meant to do this earlier in the month, but I kind of, time got away from me. And yeah, I think that it is time to give an updated look at these, Senate elections, which will be so important, for the balance of power and for what happened, what legislation gets passed through Congress, under the next administration, whether that be a second term of Joe Biden as president or, a Republican taking back the White House. Now, on the presidential level, I do expect the matchup to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, which I think will benefit Democrats in many of these, in many congressional races and, and especially in the Senate and the House. But because Trump when Trump has won, his victories in GOP primaries, he often carries candidates like him along with him to the general election. And as we saw in 2018, 2020, and 2022, they do not usually resonate very well with swing voters and battleground states in general. So while the map, in 2024 does, favor Republicans pretty significantly, considering Democrats have to defend incumbents in states like Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia, which all voted for Donald Trump twice in 2016 and 2020, as long as defend incumbents in states like Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which were all under 5% in the 2020 and 2016 elections. It is going to be a very tough election cycle for them, but they have a lot of strong incumbents. They have a lot of, strong candidates in some of these races, and the GOP also does not have very strong, challengers to a lot of these incumbents. So let's start by giving or putting, filling out these safe states for both parties. We're going to start with the safe Democratic states. The usual suspects. Minnesota, you may be surprised to see that is because Amy Klobuchar is a very strong incumbent, and I think she will win by over 15%. Martin Heinrich in New Mexico, also a very strong incumbent, could be under 15 just because, New Mexico is, not usually safe. But I think Heinrich runs just enough ahead of Biden to win by just 15. In New Jersey, you could make a case for Bob Menendez winning by less than 15. He's not the best candidate. Has a lot of, he's pretty controversial, but I do believe that this time it doesn't look like Republicans are really making that much of an effort to challenge him. And also, I'll be adding back the state of Maine. I think Angus King, though he is an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, he does technically count as a Democrat. I had this at likely D in my last prediction back in July, but I think upon further reflection, Angus King, like Susan Collins, is beloved by, Maine voters. They really like their independent streak. King was the governor of Maine. He, has won both of his Senate elections by massive margins, and he's running again. So I do believe that we are going to see another 15-point victory for Angus King. And, this is a you start to see what I mean by Democrats not having a great point, because even with all of these safe states, they're only at 42 seats. But the good news for them is that a lot of their retirements, three out of their four retiring incumbents are in the safe blue states. In California, we have Dianne Feinstein, running or not running for re-election. That's going to be a very interesting primary there. In Maryland, Ben Cardin is retiring, and in Delaware, Tom Carper is also hanging up, his position. So, the only real, retirement that they need to worry about is in the state of Michigan, which we will get to in a second. But we are first going to fill out the states of, the safe states for the GOP. and they do not have to defend nearly as many seats, but we're going to, fill them out because there are quite a few. There's Utah, Wyoming, both of Nebraska's Senate elections. There is a special election because Ben Sass, the other senator from the state, resigned earlier this year, and Pete Ricketts, the former governor of the state, was appointed to the Senate seat by his successor in the governor's mansion, Jim Pillen. So Ricketts, is running for running to finish Sass's term, which expires, the his full term is up in 2026, and Ricketts is going to easily win. North Dakota, Kevin Cramer will be fine. Mississippi, Tennessee, and Indiana are all going to be very safe for the GOP. Indiana and North Dakota were competitive back in 2018, as well as Tennessee. In North Dakota and Indiana, there were Democratic incumbents. Republicans flipped both of them. Tennessee was an open race, but Democrats had a former governor, Phil Bredesen, running. None of these seats are going to be competitive. Indiana is an open seat, but Jim Banks is going to replace Mike Braun. He's, pretty much unopposed. He doesn't have any major opposition in the Republican primary, so he will be the next senator from Indiana. It's also going to be a Republican, victory nonetheless. So that leaves us with 12 seats that are not safe. We're going to go for the likely states first, and then we will be moving, down the list of the states that I think are the most competitive. So we'll start off with the likely Democratic states. I only see two. The first one is the state of Virginia. Tim Kaine is a pretty strong incumbent. He won by 16 points back in 2018, and he's running for re-election. Republicans have a pretty, have a long list of candidates running to replace him or to defeat, to challenge him. Hung Kao is probably the most well-known one. He is, he was known for challenging Jennifer Wexton last year in the 10th congressional district in Virginia. The other, one that I think has a lot of name recognition is Scott Parkinson, who's the Club for Growth, or the vice president of the Club for Growth. And he has a lot of endorsements from, U.S. senators and representatives. But either way, I think that Tim Kaine really doesn't have too much to worry about. Of course, Virginia did vote for Glenn Youngkin in the governor's race, but governor's races are very different from Senate races, and I think that, he's likely to outrun Joe Biden. He historically has outrun Democrats at the top of the ticket. He outran Obama in 2012, and he outran House Democrats in his reelection in 2018. So I think Tim Kaine wins by around 12 to 13. Could be safe, if I think right now I'm expecting Hung Kao to be the nominee, but if it's Scott Parkinson, I could see it being safe. I'm just going to keep it as likely. And the other likely Democratic state is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has been very good for Democrats in recent years. Bob Casey is also a very strong incumbent. He is running for re-election. He's won three elections in a row, all by very strong margins. And while Pennsylvania is a pretty strong swing state, is a pretty important swing state, Republicans really don't have are really going to struggle in this race against Casey. Really, no matter who they run. At first, it looked like Doug Mastriano, who was the nominee for governor of Pennsylvania last year, would run. He would have been a terrible candidate. Same with Kathy Barnett, who ran for Senate last year. So right now, it looks like the presumptive nominee is going to be David McCormick, who's probably going to run, especially since he, will probably have a clear, he pretty much has a cleared primary field, unless, say the state treasurer, Stacey Garrity, runs. But McCormick, I think, is a decent candidate. He was better than Dr. Oz, that's for sure. But, he also does have similar allegations of he could also be, um, criticized for kind of being a carpetbagger as well, because of course all of us remember Dr. Oz being criticized for moving to Pennsylvania from New Jersey, like a year before he lost that election. And David McCormick, while he did grow up in Pennsylvania, has mostly lived in Connecticut. So I think McCormick, you know he's not as moderate as he appears. He's better than Dr. Oz. And, I think that he would have done better against John Fetterman. I don't know if he would have won. But I think that he has a lot of more baggage than I originally, you know, believed he did. And I think that against Bob Casey, he's really going to struggle. I think that Casey wins by like 8 or 9. It'll probably be his It'll probably, it'd be his closest election of his Senate career. But nonetheless, I think that he has a pretty strong performance. So now we're going to go to the likely Republican states. So the first one is Missouri. Josh Hawley is not a very strong incumbent in my eyes, but Missouri is a very red state. And while Democrats are really hoping that Lucas Kunce, who's their presumptive nominee, he's raised a lot of money and they're really hoping he can make this a race. I really don't see him winning. Democrats had a fairly strong performance in 2022. Trudy Bush Valentine came within 13, lost the Senate race by only 13 points. I think that Hawley wins by like, say, 12, but I also think, I think he underperforms Trump in, the St. Louis and Kansas City suburbs, but he still does not, I think, have a realistic chance at losing, especially in a presidential year. He may be very controversial. I know that, nationally he's not very well liked. And in Missouri, I don't know, I'm not familiar with his approval rating, but we're such a polarized country, and I really don't see him, you know, having too much trouble winning re-election, but I do not think he will win by over 15. And then we go down to the state of Florida. This is a state that has actually gotten pretty interesting. Yesterday, Democrats finally got a recognizable candidate or a candidate with experience, if you will, to run in this race against Rick Scott. Now, Florida, of course, was a very good state for Republicans last year. It's right trending. It voted for Marco Rubio by 16 points in the Senate race last year. Ron DeSantis won his reelection by 19 points. And no matter what, I don't think the Republicans are going to win, Florida by a safe margin in 2024. I think a lot of that had to do with turnout, but it is clearly a red state. However, Rick Scott's not the most popular, senator. He's not the best candidate. And yes, he has a winning streak, but Democrats do finally have a major candidate to run in this race, and that is Debbie Murkazal Powell. She is the former congresswoman from Florida's 26th congressional district. She was a 2018 wave baby who lost in 2020, or lost her reelection in 2020. So she's not, a world beater, but I think that she has appeal to voters in Miami. I think that she is, you know, a pretty average candidate. She's probably the best, compared to a lot of these other candidates who, Democrats have, got into enter into the race. I think that she is the strongest. I think that she, is going to, outrun Joe Biden. She outran him in her congressional race in 2020. And I think that she, has potential. But, of course, Florida is Florida, and I would be really surprised if Democrats win the state back, especially after Rick Scott knocked off Bill Nelson in 2018. So while I think Scott's a pretty clear favorite, I think that this race has potential to get a little bit closer now. I think that Democrats, really, they finally got someone to run in this race that really wasn't being talked about. And now I think that Florida, if things start going well for Democrats, I could see moving Florida down to lean red. I don't know if I would move it into the toss-up column. I think that's a bit extreme, but I could definitely see it going down to lean red. But only time will tell on that front. And then we go to the final likely red state, which is the state of West Virginia. This state does have a Democratic incumbent, Joe Manchin, who has not announced if he's going to run for re-election. He might run for president as a third-party candidate, but personally, I think he is going to run for re-election to the Senate. However, he has a very strong. He has a very he's going to have a very hard time winning re-election because West Virginia is a very right-turning state. Polarization is really kicking in, and in 2018, or in 2012, when he won his first full term, he won by 24 points when Barack Obama was losing the state by nearly 30. And then in 2018, a bluer environment, he was only able to win by 3 points. He didn't even crack 50% of the vote. Now, again, he was up against the Attorney General of the state, Patrick Morrisey, who I think a lot of people kind of dismissed as a really bad candidate. And I don't think he was amazing, but I also don't think he was terrible. Um, you know, and it's not, super surprising that Manchin, won by less than 24 points. I don't think really anyone expected him to back them, but this was an underperformance, and in a blue wave environment, it's going to be really hard for in an environment that's presumably going to be less blue than 2018. I think it's going to be really hard for Joe Manchin to win re-election, especially in a presidential year where Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, whoever the GOP presidential nominee is going to win the state by 40 points. I think Manchin can outrun Biden by like 20 to 25, but that's still a pretty big, or maybe closer to 30, but getting a 40-point overperformance is a lot to ask for. Jim Justice, the former governor of the state, is running. I expect him to be the nominee. He's definitely the stronger candidate. I think Alex Mooney is also running. He's a congressman. I don't think he's quite as popular. I don't think he'd do as well against Manchin, but I do think that either of them would defeat Joe Manchin. Right now, I think Jim Justice is the nominee for the Republicans, and I think that he beats Joe Manchin pretty decisively by like 12 to 13 points. I personally think this race has more volatility than Missouri and Florida, but overall, in terms of margin, it is probably going to vote for Justice by more than Missouri votes for Hawley or Florida votes for Scott. So now we're left with 7 races that I would consider to be true battlegrounds, and we're going to go from west to east because the last couple, since the rest of my predictions I've kind of gone, for the lean states and kind of done a similar pattern. So today I'm going to kind of shake it up and have us go from west to east. So first we're going to start with the state of Nevada, which I would characterize to be a lean Democratic state. Jackie Rosen is not a very strong incumbent, but she's not a terrible one either. Nevada is a light blue state, and she did defeat Dean Heller in 2018 by 5 points. I don't think she wins by five again, but I think that she's in a pretty good position in the state of Nevada. In 2022, Republicans were working with an electorate that voted for Trump by 5 points, and they still lost the Senate race and barely won the governor's race. And I think that Rosen, while she's not unbeatable, she doesn't have, Republicans kind of have a crowded primary and they don't have the best selection of candidates. You have Sam Brown, who was, a former veteran and ran for Senate against Adam Laxalt in 2022. I think he's decent. He's got the support of Steve Daines, the chair of the NRSC. You have Jeffrey Ross Gunter, who was the former ambassador to Iceland. I don't know too much about him, but I think the most likely candidate to win the nomination is Jim Marchant, who ran for Secretary of State in 2022, lost to Cisco Aguilar, and underperformed. Almost every other Republican statewide. Every other Republican nominee for statewide office, and I think in 2024, he will underperform Trump. If he is the nominee, which I expect him to be. I think Rosen is not unbeatable, but Democrats really, have lucked out in Nevada. It's a very polarized state, it's very stagnant, and I think that Rosen will outrun Joe Biden. I think she wins by 3 to 4 points currently against Jackie Rosen. Rick Harrison, celebrity, from Pawn Stars could also jump into the race, but I don't think he'd be too strong of a candidate either. So either way, I think Rosen is a pretty clear favorite for reelection, but obviously this race is not safe. It's definitely one to watch out for. And if Trump wins Nevada in 2024, that could really endanger Rosen in her Senate race. Or, if Biden wins, if Nevada is like a razor thin margin, this race could definitely, move down since there's not a lot of ticket splitting in the state. Then we go to Arizona. I'm moving this up to a lean Democratic state. I'm hesitant to do this, but more polling shows that Kirsten Sinema, who is still hasn't announced if she's going to run yet, is taking votes away from both parties. It's not just Ruben Gallego who's suffering from Sinema's presence. It's Carrie Lake, and I think that you know, who I believe is going to be the Republican nominee. There's been reports that she plans to announce a run in October, and that she's gearing, assembling a Senate staff. You could also see Mark Lamb, the sheriff of Pinal County, be the nominee. But I think we're in for a Gallego Lake and Cinnamon matchup. So, in a lot of these polls, we're starting to see Cinema's actually getting a second place over the Republican nominee. Now, do I believe that? No. I think that Cinema is not getting a quarter of the vote. I think right now, if I had to guess, she's getting 10 to 15%. And while I do think that she's taking more votes away from Democrats than Republicans, she's not, she takes enough votes away from Republicans to keep Gallego over the edge. I think that um, you know, there are a lot of moderate Republicans who just can't stomach voting for a Democrat, but don't necessarily like the Trumpy, kind of vibe that Carrie Lake gives off. And I think that some of them will vote for Cinema. I think some moderate Dems will vote for Cinema, and some, moderates will vote for her. But I don't think that there will be enough splintering from the Democrats to allow a Republican victory in Arizona, especially when you have a terrible candidate like Carrie Lake. I think Ruben Gallego is not a perfect candidate, but I think that he's good enough. I think that he wins enough suburbanites. I think that he does well enough with Hispanic turnout to, win this race by, say, about 2 points. Then we go up to Montana. This is a very, very close race, very, very important to the Senate majority. Jon Tester is a very strong incumbent who's won 3 times in the past, been able to overperform Democrats. And while he's in, while he's in a state that voted for Trump by 16 points, and, polarization is going to hurt him, Republicans really are having trouble, are really not, they don't really have their things together in this race. A lot of the GOP establishment has been backing Tim Sheehy, who is a former who was the CEO of Bridger Aerospace, but and pretty much most of a lot of U.S. senators and Ryan Zinke, who is one of the representatives for from Montana, have endorsed Sheehy, but it still seems like Matt Rosendale, the other congressman from the state who lost to Tester in 2018, is thinking, ahead in the polling data. Now, again, the most recent poll was conducted before Sheehy entered the race. I think that this race, this primary is going to be pretty divisive, and I think Republicans are really worried about a Rosendale candidacy, and while Sheehy could definitely get Trump's endorsement and win this primary, I think it's more likely that Trump just stays out of it and Rosendale wins the nomination. And while I don't think that Sheehy is a perfect candidate, I think he's better than Rosendale. I think that, Rosendale currently is the more likely candidate to win the nomination, and Tester, I think, will overperform Biden by, like, say, 12 to 13 points. And right now, I expect Biden to lose Montana, to Trump by, around that margin. So, as long as, Trump doesn't win Montana by, say 16 to 20 points, I think Tester is currently favored. Montana is a small state. Tester doesn't really need to, win that many more voters, in terms of raw votes than Joe Biden. And I think that, given his track record of, having a pretty consistent margins of a victory, unlike Joe Manchin, I think that is enough for me to classify him as as the favorite in this race. But it's very close, and this is one of the closest races on the map right now. Then we go down to Texas. Ted Cruz is running for re-election. He had a very close race back in 2018, and Colin Allred looks like he's going to be his opponent this time, instead of Beto O'Rourke. I think Allred is a pretty strong candidate, but While he will probably outrun Joe Biden, I don't think that he is the favorite right now. I think Texas is still a, red-leaning state. If the suburbs and the Rio Grande Valley are strong enough for Democrats, if Democrats can build back ground in South Texas and, shift, areas like Houston and Dallas and, Austin far enough to the left, they can win this race. But I think right now, even though Allred's really I think an underrated candidate. I think that Cruz, despite his unpopularity, is the favorite in this race. He will probably do worse than Donald Trump. And if, I think that this race is going to, really attract a lot of attention. Allred could win, but I think right now, you know, that, just given that Texas has been pretty stubbornly red, I think that right now, I'm more comfortable classifying Cruz as the favorite in this race. Now we go up to the Rust Belt with these final three states. I'm going to classify Wisconsin as a lean blue state. I know a lot of people have been moving this up to likely since Tom Tiffany announced that he's not going to run. And while I understand that, I'm not ready to move it up to likely D just yet. I think it's bordering on it. But David Clark, while a very bad candidate for the GOP who's likely to run, he's the former Milwaukee County Sheriff. I don't think that Tammy Baldwin is, going to win by 5 points again. I think that she's pretty close. She could, but right now I'd say she wins by, say, 4.5. I think that Wisconsin has been very strong for Democrats. Baldwin has a very strong electoral history, and she has very strong. She's able to appeal to both suburban and working class voters. And, so I think that she will outrun Biden for sure, no matter what happens, even if Biden loses Wisconsin per se. But, Republicans really don't have a very strong candidate in Wisconsin. And first they looked at Mike Gallagher, who I think could have posed a pretty strong threat to Baldwin. I still think he would have lost, but he declined, and then Tiffany was the next candidate who was expected to run, not as good as Gallagher, and then he declined, and then kind of we're left with David Clark and Eric Hoft, who ran for Senate back in 2012, and the whole appeal of him, I guess, is that he's, as a very rich businessman who can, self fund his campaign. But I think right now Baldwin is a pretty clear favorite in the state of Wisconsin. Then we go to Michigan, which is our final lean Democratic state. Uh, this is the only race, the only competitive race where, the incumbent is retiring. Debbie Stabenow, the incumbent Democrat, is not running for re-election. And, on the surface, that's pretty bad for Democrats, but they have a, very strong bench. Most, Democrats have declined to run in this race. Most of the, recognizable ones. But, I think right now the most likely candidates to win the nomination are either Alyssa Slotkin or Hill Harper. Right now, I think it's going to be Slotkin. I think that she, you know, with her being a congresswoman and having a lot of appeal to, Democratic voters in the suburbs of the state and, in the rural areas, I think is the favorite. I think Hill Harper could win the nomination, but, and I think Eva would be fine in the general election, but that is kind of, I think right now Slotkin is currently most likely to be the nominee. On the Republican side, there hasn't been a lot of news. I think, well, we haven't had anyone officially enter into the race, but James Craig, who did, run for governor in 2022, but was disqualified because he didn't have enough signatures, is slated to run. I think he's going to announce next month in September. That is what most people have been saying, what most of the reports have been telling us. And while Craig, I think, is a stronger candidate than say Bill Huizenga or Lisa McClain, and McClain, I guess she declined, but I think Craig is probably the best candidate Republicans could put up, but he's no world beater. I think he probably still would have lost to Gretchen Whitmer, not by 10, 11 points like Tudor Dixon did, but I think that he probably loses by say 4 to 5 points to Slotkin. I think Michigan's pretty clearly a lean blue state, maybe a little bit closer than Wisconsin. So now you can see that Republicans are at 50 seats and Democrats are at 49. And while I expect Democrats to win the presidency, and since I expect Democrats to, win the White House, this does leave the opportunity for them to win the Senate, and, have Kamala Harris break the tie as vice president if they win the state of Ohio. Currently, though, I do think the Republicans are still favored here. We had that Ohio issue one vote, which, the liberal side won pretty overwhelmingly. And I think that the pro-choice amendment is going to pass in the state in November. And while I think Sherrod Brown's a very strong incumbent, and Frank LaRose, kind of made a mistake by backing issue one, I don't think that was a great move for someone running against a very strong incumbent, who's going to need, going to need to squeeze every vote out of the suburbs that he can to keep up with Brown's overperformances in the working class areas. I still think LaRose is probably favored in this race. Trump is going to win the state, or DeSantis, the Republican nominee, is going to win the state easily. Probably, I think Trump right now, who I think will be the nominee, will win the state by say 9 to 10 points. I think Brown can overperform by a lot, but he's proven it before, but right now, I think that he is the narrow underdog. He did not have, I think his 2018 performance isn't as impressive as it seems on the surface when, you remember the fact that he was supposed to win by, double digits and he only won by 7, which is still, a pretty good margin for a Democrat in Ohio. But again, Republicans didn't really invest in that race. And now that, but no matter what happens here, I think that, Republicans are really going to invest in this race, even if they put up a terrible candidate like Bernie Moreno. But currently, I do think LaRose is the favorite to win the nomination and is a narrow favorite against Brown. But again, time will tell. We will see if that, does come, if Brown can come back from this, can get sorry, I guess we'll see if my opinion changes. I think we could definitely see Sherrod Brown win re-election. So this is the final map for this prediction. Republicans are at 51 Senate seats. They flip Ohio and West Virginia. Democrats pretty much sweep the rest of, hold on to the rest of their seats. They do lose Texas and Florida, and Missouri, and obviously, they lose Ohio and West Virginia, as I said. So, Republicans flip 2 seats and gain back the Senate majority with 51 seats. Democrats are at 49. Not a very strong performance for the GOP, but given the map, Democrats are going to have a really tough time winning, the Senate in 2024. But it is definitely possible, and they are definitely doing a lot better. They're doing a lot better than they could be right now. So let me know what you guys think about my prediction. Let me know what you think is going to happen in these Senate races in 2024. If you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And share the video with someone who you think would enjoy it. Check out my non-political channel, Interactor127, and my comrades channel, GrowlingZeus666. And thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.